Great, thank you. All right, go ahead, Christi.
So, welcome everybody. Erin and I are thrilled to be here. This is the first of many concurrent sessions that are happening in the 2020 virtual peer apocalypse. So we're thrilled to be here. We're going to be talking about today, Nothing About Us Without Us, so collaborating with peers in research. Yeah, we're excited and let's jump right in. All right, so I want to just do a quick introduction of myself and then we'll get started. So I'm Christi Hildebran. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm also by training, I'm a social worker and I'm an alcohol and drug counselor here in Oregon. And probably one of my kind of key identifiers too is I also am a motorcyclist. So I've done lots of traveling by motorcycle. It's my favorite thing to do when I am not engaging in the world. It's meditative for me. It's certainly self-care. It's all the things. And it's important to say, I'm also a Texan, so if there's other Texans on the call or other transplants from other states, we can talk offline, but that's who I am. I'm happy to be here, and I'll turn it over to Erin for introductions.
My name is Erin Stack, and I'm a person who has family members with severe and persistent mental illness. Through my lived experiences, I decided about 10 years ago to study community psychology. I was drawn to it because of its tenets of social action, social justice, and working with various marginalized populations, underrepresented populations in research, and also in our broader communities when we think about policy change. I am an avid runner. I love running. That's a picture of me in the middle after the Chicago Marathon this last November, which feels like it was about 20 years ago because time is wild right now. And then I'm also an aspiring gardener, trying to get more into that this year, and a maker and a crafter. So you see a couple of examples of me making with Patrick Swayze. So let's see. So let's jump into things. So the plan for today is to briefly discuss what is research and evaluation. So we just want to define it for the group in the ways that we define it, and also talk about some of the historical pieces of research, what it meant to do research and things that still happen now, talk about some of those atrocities that have happened in the name of research, and then get into some of our current work. So get into our current work that we're doing around peer-delivered services and how it's impacting individuals in our community. And then we're just going to get into where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, which is discussing future work and how you can potentially be involved. So we really want to hear from you about what should we be studying? What are you seeing popping up in your work? It's really kind of the idea of like things that you might know anecdotally because of all your experience working within the field, but like we want to study it and have it be more broadly disseminated. So we'll jump into that discussion later on. So first, let's get into what is research and evaluation. So research and evaluation is the process of systematically studying a topic, a behavior, or practice for one or more of these following reasons. So the idea of knowledge gain, so it's to explore, to learn more about a certain topic area, really for the purpose of just knowing it. And then the second thing listed here is for policy suggestion, and the third one is practice suggestion. So that 2 and 3, you might hear a lot the idea of something is evidence-based. That means researchers, or more likely a group of researchers, have studied something and proven it to have certain outcomes over time. So things are called evidence-based. So then we can kind of move things forward to say, like, because of this evidence-based that research and evaluation has shown, we would suggest these things happen related to policy or practice changes within organizations. So it can be really powerful in that way. I like this image here because it's kind of the idea of research. You mean like Google? And actually a lot of our jobs sometimes is Googling things. We want to know what's out there. We look at the literature, we build on what already people have done. A lot of times what's already happening in communities, and we try to lift it up and then study it and get that evidence base behind it. But the idea is it goes a little further beyond that. So it's less about going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole and more about the systematic piece of studying something. And then we actually do our own, we move beyond that and do data collection. So data collection meaning that we survey individuals and communities. We can do interviews and focus groups with people to really learn more on a certain topic that may not have been explored very much so far. All right, so in this presentation, we are going to be talking about research and evaluation sort of interchangeably, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is that our team is called the Research and Evaluation Team, so we do both research and evaluation, but when we talk about it as a group, we kind of blend them together. And the other piece is that research and evaluation day-to-day often look quite similar. You almost wouldn't be able to tell whether or not something was a research and evaluation project just like following someone through their day. But what is different about them is sort of the underlying tenets of it, like the background, the goals, the intent, things like that make research and evaluation a little different. So just as an example of a couple of those things. So generally, research really focuses on now the knowledge gain piece of things, like moving the field forward in the way of exploring topics, really getting that base of understanding about certain topics. And evaluation is more localized. It's focused usually on like programs, policies within a local area. It's pretty specific in what it's studying. And oftentimes that leads to not necessarily like super generalizable results. It's really focused on like the context of a certain area and things like that. Another piece that makes them a little bit different is dissemination, or how we share the findings of research and evaluation projects. Research is oftentimes goes through this peer-reviewed process when we're sharing our findings, and those are things like manuscripts, journal articles, and it's a way to, so it gets broadly disseminated to the scientific community. There's been more of a push to make sure that that gets disseminated to more lay audience, like communities, programs. But evaluation really focuses there, that the dissemination gets shared with programs, more with like at the community level as opposed to scientific level. So those are just a couple of differences between the two. Another major thing is that evaluation really puts a value on the findings that they're showing. So they're really wanting to see whether outcomes are effective, ways to improve. So it's really focused on that, where research is more collecting and unbiased of knowing. Okay, and so just a little bit, Christy's going to talk a lot about our projects that we're currently working on to give you kind of an idea of the work that we do, but just to give you just a brief overview of kind of what our approach is to research and evaluation, to kind of solidify it in a little bit of some examples. So we start out with a participant first model. So we're really thinking about like, what are we trying to answer or understand? We do a little bit of that Googling, exploring what's out there. What are we interested in? What are we seeing are the issues in the communities, and ways that we think that maybe interventions or way we can look at data differently to see what's actually going on. Identifying who is the audience and for whom we would be doing this research. And then we get into asking ourselves the serious questions of why are we doing this? What would be the vision and the outcome of what we would do with these data once we get them? And a strategy of how we're going to do it. We talk a lot about feasibility of data collection, what it would mean to communities to have these data, the power of data. So that's an important piece of things. And then then we go on to the goals, things that we want to achieve. And we really focus on what's currently being done and what things could change based on the data that would make communities thrive, really a focus on community well-being. Okay, that's everything for the research and evaluation kind of brief overview. Jump into the poll question. I also invite folks that if you do have any questions that have come up, feel free to send them into the chat and we'll be happy to answer them as we're going along. Sorry for not mentioning that at first. So it looks like Adrian has pulled up the poll question. I'll just read it out loud. Have you ever been involved in research? And there's 2 yeses, so you can say, yes, I was part of a research team, or yes, I was a research participant. And then there's 2 no responses, so you could say, no, I have never been involved in research, but I would be interested, and no, I have never been involved in research and I am not interested.
We're seeing a lot of responses come through. Thank you. Great to see. So far, it looks like a lot of folks who are on this webinar this morning have been a part of a research team, and then almost the same number haven't been involved in a research project but are interested in doing that. And then about nine of the 40 respondents have been research participants as well. And we only have one person who has not been involved in a research project and is not interested. So it looks like the majority of folks who are with us this morning, almost 50% right now, haven't been involved in a research project, but would be interested in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you.
And we are at 95% of folks who are on this workshop have responded. So that is a pretty great response rate. So thank you everyone for taking a moment to fill this out. So I am going to close this poll in about 10 more seconds, and then I will read the final results. I will publish those so folks can see them here within the Zoom room. All right, so I am now moving to end poll and then sharing the results right now.
Wow, that's great. I'm also just realizing that those two, you potentially could have been on the research team and a participant. So I'm sorry that I didn't give you the check all that apply option, but great to see how many people are interested and already have lots of experience. So as I said, we're going to be going into the discussion at the end. I'm so excited to hear from you all about what you think should be our next direction. So thanks for taking the poll. All right, Christy, I will move us forward and pass it off to you.
All right, so I'm going to just take a few minutes to kind of name the past and talk about something that Erin had mentioned earlier, is that we can't talk about research without talking about the foundation of research and actually how initial studies really harmed people, right? So I'm just going to highlight just a few. Unfortunately, there have been many studies that have harmed individuals for years and years and years until some mechanisms were put in place to protect participants of research studies. So talk about the first one, which was the Tuskegee study, which some of you may be familiar with. And this started in 1932. It was originally just a 6-month study, but went on for 40 years. And so the United States Public Health Service was interested in studying syphilis. And what happened as a result of this is that they initially included 600 African American men. 399 of those had syphilis, 200 didn't. And what they were told is that they were going to follow them, give them free health care, medical care. But what they told them was that they were part of this study because of bad blood. Well, back in the day, bad blood could be syphilis, it could be other areas of health that weren't called out specifically. So the men were not told explicitly what was happening, what they were being studied. They were not given informed consent. They weren't told that they could leave the study at any time, that they could ask questions, that they could refuse certain procedures or certain examinations. And as a result, also during this time of the 40 years, penicillin came into place, and none of the men were ever offered penicillin as a treatment for syphilis. And as a result, just horrible things happened to them, their partners, their families. And as a result, there are still children of family members of the Tuskegee that are still being followed today. There's 11 people in the United States that are still being followed in this. As a result of Tuskegee, the Belmont report came out, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That second bullet is the Nazi human experiments that happened in the 40s, and many of you have heard about this, know about this, and what happened. Horrific torture and medical experiments that happened in concentration camps in the 1940s. And as a result, Nazi war crimes were brought to some of the Germans who participated in this. From that, the Nuremberg Code, many of you may know about, was instituted as a part of trying to make right some of the things that happened. In 1961, Stanley Milgram at Yale conducted an experiment called the Milgram experiment. And what happened as a result of this is this was on the heels of the Nazi war crimes and the human experiments that happened in the concentration camps. And Milgram was interested in studying and understanding, like, how could people be complicit in harming others? And so he set up a study in the basement of Yale where he basically had participants have a dial, and the dial was set to a shock treatment for others that they could not see. So someone was hooked up to this shock treatment. And as they answered wrong questions, they would have to initiate a level of shock, and they would have to turn up the intensity of the shock. Now, what the participants didn't know is that the people on the other side were merely actors, and they weren't actually being shocked, but they would, respond as if they were and beg and plead and ask them not to. And what he found is around 65% could actually fully go to the maximum level of shock experiment. Clearly unethical, clearly just wrong to do this, not only to study this, but also the emotional trauma that it caused for people that were initiating the shock and being complicit. And so the study was really looking at obedience to authority and trying to understand that. So as a result, we have the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, institutional review boards I'll talk about in a second. But the last one I want to talk about is the Havasu tribal genetic study, and this happened in 1989. So even with some of these protections that happened later on in place, people still do unethical things in research. And with the Havasu tribal genetic study, members of the Havasu tribe were approached about studying diabetes, which has a higher propensity in some Native communities. And they said, well, we want to take blood and we want to run some diabetes and genetic testing around diabetes. And so some of the tribal members said, great, okay, we will, yes. And as a result, what they did, what the researchers through University of Arizona did was actually did genetic studies on all kinds of other things that the tribal members didn't approve of. And as a result, major lawsuit, really unethical, loss of trust, all of the things that are just terrible, right? As a result of these things, we have Nuremberg Code, Declaration of Helsinki, the Institutional Review Board. So all of these are areas in which we're talking about medical and behavioral health ethics, right? When it comes to working with people, conducting research. For an example, with the Institutional Review Board, that is a review board, a third-party review board that's put into place. So every research study that we conduct, we have to submit our protocol. This is what we're studying. Here's who's going to be involved. Here's how we're going to provide written and informal consent, which is, this is what the study is about. This is how you're going to participate, or how you can participate. If you have any questions, that you can leave the study at any time, that you can file grievances, all of the things. And that has to go in front of this board that reviews it and says, yes, there's not any potential substantial risk to individuals. This happens sometimes with medication trials. This happens with many of the studies that we're working on with peers, in particular, with folks who are actively using substances, with HIV and hepatitis type studies. And so these are good things that are put in place to protect individuals moving forward. So I think it's just important for us to name what has happened, and that is unfortunately the foundation in which our work is built on, and that we have mechanisms in place to make sure that these never happen again. It's also important to note, like, the history of research is really typically housed in university settings and academic settings, with mostly white men leading research efforts. So sometimes who's being researched is not necessarily being represented by the people that are running the research studies. So there's not lots of research studies with women in particular. With peers, this is a new and emerging field of study in the last 10 years. And so we'll talk a bit about that and why it's important. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the peer research that we're conducting here at CoMagin with our partners. And as you can see, there's a couple slides of some of our awesome peers with Oregon Hope and Prime Plus. Next slide, please. All right, the first study I want to talk about is Oregon Hope. And some of you, actually we have some of our Oregon Hope peers here and some of our researchers from Hope as well. So if I get anything wrong, please jump in. You know me. On occasion, I've been known to get things wrong, so please jump in. So this is a really cool study that is funded by the CDC, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and SAMHSA. And the goal of this is to increase access and treatment for people with HIV and hepatitis C, and folks that also have been diagnosed with opioid use disorder, and folks that are living in rural communities through peer outreach. So we have really phenomenal peers. 2 of them are on the call. Please jump in if you feel comfortable, not to out you, but if you feel comfortable, and talk a little bit about your work. So the idea is that there's actual outreach happening within these rural communities to link people who are actively using to Hep C testing, and if positive, treatment, and same with HIV testing and treatment. And that happens, the Hep C happens through telemedicine. This happens through syringe exchange. This happens through bridging the gap with someone's ready and would like to seek treatment. They can bridge the gap to medications for opioid use disorder and kind of all areas of general health. So it's a really cool community-based peer outreach program. I'm going to pause there and see if any of our peers or if any of our team members want to say anything about HOPE. Jump in. I know you're not shy. Good question. I'm seeing, does COMAGIN pay study participants in the HOPE program? Yes, so on some of the data collection, so there's surveys and there's qualitative interviews, meaning we will go out and spend time with study participants, and we pay people for their time in completing surveys and interviews. So great question. Okay, let's move forward. Prime Plus. So some of you may have heard of Prime, which is initiated through ERs, and it's in a response to folks that have experienced an overdose and are in the ED and having peers housed in the ED. And Prime Plus is also kind of an offshoot, an expansion, I'm not sure the right words here, of Prime. And so this is in rural and frontier Eastern Oregon in particular. So this is in Klamath, Malheur, and Umatilla counties. And we deploy peer support specialists that are engaging people who use drugs. So EDs reach out, EDs and hospitals reach out to our peers in the community. And again, with the goal of providing hepatitis B and C testing, linkage to care, and other support. Really cool program. We're finishing up our first year. I want to take a pause right there. I know there's a lot more to this. As you saw in some of the slides, some of the cool things that the peers are doing, walkthrough Wednesdays and having kind of mobile and community-based tents set up. I'm looking to Justine here around folks want to come in and get syringes. Narcan distribution is big, not only on HOPE, but also on Prime Plus, making sure people are safe when they are using and around folks. What are the things am I missing, folks? Anybody want to jump in? Okay. One more. Last one we're going to talk about, and there's some other kind of peer projects that we're working on. The last one I want to highlight is the ROAR project. And so this is funded by the CDC, and we are doing a pilot intervention with women who are released from Coffee Creek. And so these are women who have been assessed as having like a moderate to severe opioid use disorder. And so these are women who have a history of using opioids, that they would like to have a peer, and they would like to try medication for opioid use disorder. So what that looks like is naltrexone. So naltrexone is a blocker. It prevents overdoses. It prevents the effects of opioids if someone decides to use an opioid. So what happens with the peers here is they do in-reach visits while the women are still incarcerated at Coffee Creek. And so they do a few in-reaches to try to find some alliance and connection, and ask them how they're feeling about getting released, and what can I help you once you get released, how can I help you in community? Is there ways that I can help navigate? I can tell you my experience. So our peers are awesome. They've also experienced there with lived experience in recovery, and both of our peers also were women who were previously incarcerated. So they talk about their experience, they share their experience, strength, and hope with them, and then they meet them at release, or they meet them at release to say hello when their family members come to pick them up. and then they bridge the gap between the institutions, Coffee Creek, and treatment in the community. And that can look in a lot of different ways. So that could be they have ongoing medication. That could be they do outpatient counseling. That could be no medication, no counseling. Lots of different ways in which they're providing peer-related services in community. I'll pause right there. Erin, anything else about ROAR? Sorry.
Christi, I had seen a question come through the chat. Do you want me to go ahead and read that now?
Yes, please.
So this says, looks like great research. Can the public researchers obtain the data from your studies to use in our research and evaluation? And the second part is, where can we see the data?
Great question. So we have, for all three projects, we have done some presentations and publications. So the presentations have happened through PowerPoint presentations with community partners, and we're happy to share those with folks. And some of those have been excerpts from the qualitative interviews and some of those initial findings that we're seeing when we're going out into community, asking people about their experiences. Recently, I would tell you guys that in the last 6 weeks or so, because of COVID, we have reached out to people in the community and talked about what has COVID and social isolation, how has that impacted you? How's that impacted your use? We have initial kind of preliminary findings with that. We have our protocol for ROAR, meaning kind of all the steps we've taken. That is in a manuscript. And so, Adrian, I probably look to you in ways in which we could disseminate some of that information after the conference. Great question.
Thank you. And then I see one more question that has popped up, and that says, how has your research around gender-specific interventions taken into account people who are transgender, gender non-conforming, gender fluid, etc.?
Yeah, that's great. And Erin, maybe you and I can tackle both of this. You know, one of the things that I would say about the ROAR study in particular is that it's women who identify, it's participants who identify as female. So Coffee Creek is known to have transgender individuals that are residing there. Residing is not the right word, that are there. And so those individuals are also eligible. And thinking kind of, Erin, I'm looking to you, kind of a larger framework around gender. Do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, sure. So yeah, as Christi mentioned, anyone who identifies as female is welcome to participate. Or eligible to participate. In addition, we focused quite a bit on the certified recovery mentors also identify as women, and the importance of that, having that gender match, especially as people are being released from incarceration and getting support that might look different from people that identify as men, and women being released from prison, different needs, really a focus on reconnecting with family, with kids, and what that can look like. So the mentors that work on that project have a lens of focusing on gender, which is really important.
And I'm seeing, this is great that there's such interest. There's two more questions that came through. So Christi and Erin, would you like me to read those now, or would you like me to bring those up again during the question and answer time?
I think you can ask them now.
Yeah.
All right. So another question asking whether the focus is SUD, and if you have performed research on mental illness, they ask.
Yeah, so we have not specifically focused on mental illness, but also I would say that's in the context of folks that have a substance use disorder, having some co-occurring. We know for that population, there's a high rate of co-occurring depression and anxiety. And so that goes without saying, and thinking about the training for the peers in particular and what that looks like in terms of linkage to care services of whatever the individual wants to do. So I think that's really important to say.
And the next and last question that I see is asking, how does COMAGIN find or get assigned projects?
Great question. So the good news is we have a relatively large group of researchers. I think there's 10 of us in total. And I think kind of going back to Erin's introduction is what are areas of interest for us personally? Where are things that drive us, things that we feel not passionate about, but maybe passionate about, but also that, areas in which and individuals that which have not been given an opportunity to have different, what am I trying to say here? Have a different way. And so I think for us, we identify areas around use disorders, suicide. We focused on opioids for quite a bit in the past, peers in general. And then we look to see the literature of what's known and unknown, right? So for an example, we're looking at potentially starting a study around suicide. Well, there's been a lot of work around suicide that's happened already. But there's a couple of areas that we're really interested in. So we go to the peer-reviewed literature, we go to the science, what has been studied so far, what hasn't. And then we look nationally to see, is there an academic partner, somebody at a university that we could partner with and put in a research grant. And so usually that process takes about a year. So it's quite what's the word I'm looking for? It's quite the process to figure out, one, has it been done before? Two, if it has been done before, is there an offshoot? Maybe there's a part of the population that hasn't been studied for, or it's studied about, or something else. Erin, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that sounds good.
Okay. I'm fumbling with words. I'm going to get a little bit more coffee, you guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Christi and Erin, for responding to those questions. And thank you to everyone who shared a question. Those were really excellent questions. Mm-hmm. And next we have another poll. So I'm going to launch this poll and you will see these questions come up in just a couple seconds. So I will read this as well. So the question is, which of the following things have you done while attending a meeting or webinar online? And you can pick multiple things if you've been eating breakfast, wearing pajamas, cooking the breakfast, doing all of those things simultaneously. So the first is ate breakfast. Second is wore pajamas. Third is cooked food. Fourth is brushed teeth, clipped nails, went to the bathroom, watched Netflix, YouTube, etc. Other, share in the chat. So if you see an option that wasn't listed here, go ahead and let us know in the chat what that thing was that you were doing while attending a meeting or webinar online, possibly right now. So I'm going to leave this up for about 10 more seconds, and then I will close it and share the results so we can all see what everybody has been getting up to during meetings and webinars that have been happening online. Lots of those happening online these days in particular. Wow, so already looks like a high number of people have eaten breakfast. That one seems like it's the most common right now, followed by went to the bathroom. So folks taking advantage of being able to mute, silence, turn off videos for some of these. I see a number of items in the chat: walked with my dog, did email, Skyped, parenting, doing dishes. Great stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, and then we'll share results with everybody. So at the top of the list here is ate breakfast. Lots of us have done that. You know, I've done that myself as well. Communicate with contractors I'm seeing. And then the second most popular went to the bathroom, followed by a tie with worn pajamas and cooked food. Then other, and a lot of dance and water plants, exercise, seeing a lot of great things happening in the chat there. And then brushed teeth, clipped nails, and finally about 7 folks out of the 42 that responded said, yeah, watch Netflix or YouTube while in a meeting or webinar online. So thank you all so much for responding to that poll. I'm going to go ahead and end the share of the poll.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. I feel like I got some ideas of things I can do to pass the time as well. That's awesome. All right. So we wanted to share this last slide before getting into break and discussion. So Christi talked a little bit about past atrocities and some of the ways that we're trying to make sure that those things don't happen again. You know, we have a lot of formal policies in place. And another thing that researchers are doing is changing their approaches to research. So there's this idea of participatory research, and there's several different approaches under this participatory umbrella. There's things like community-based participatory research, culturally responsive evaluation, and those things take on different, they have different approaches, and they range from having low levels of public engagement to high levels of public engagement. And that can look different from research project to research project because it really depends on the question and the funder, things like that. But one of the common things that participatory research has across all research, sorry, my dog's just growling, is it really has this action focused. So it's this idea that we don't want to do research just for research's sake. It's really trying to do this work in order to get it disseminated into the community quickly so that there can be changes made, help as many people as possible. And then there's also a piece that it's community driven. So again, not just doing research because it seems interesting, but because it will help people, will help our communities, that we can really learn from the people in the community what should be studied. So I'm just going to go through quickly what this can kind of look like. So on the lower end of level of public engagement, the idea of informing. So what that is really there's no community involvement. It's that the researchers are doing all of the data, and then they're doing all of the research, and then they're just telling people what they found. And then on the second one, there's the consultation. So that takes the form of like advisory groups that you might have maybe every quarter, every month that you're moving along in your research. And maybe every month or that you have these meetings with people from the community or that have lived experiences and just kind of getting their input on what you've been doing. And then at the mid-level, there's this idea of being involved. So people from the mid-level to high-level, people from the community who are actually doing the work are more involved on your research projects. So they might help out with things like recruitment or doing data collection, like doing interviews, getting participants to participate in the research, actually deciding what research questions should be answered, what we should submit when we're trying to get funding, like that previous question, when we're trying to get funding, who we should be asking for funding. That could have a difference depending on the communities. We talk about mistrust and all of those things, like what people feel comfortable with. And then, so involve, collaborate, and empower really are that focus on exchange of information, learning from each other in order to lift communities, agencies, like policy change, a real focus on action in those last three participatory pieces. The other thing I want to mention in participatory research that's important is that context is really important. So when we talk about history, when we talk about things that are happening in our communities that are separate from research, that are just happening based on our systems of oppression in our country and in the world, participatory research takes that into account when they're studying things. Those things can't be separated from someone's current lived experiences. That's a really important part of participatory research as well. And making sure that communities and people are involved so that we're not forgetting that thread throughout the project. It's really important. Is there anything else to add, Christi, about participatory research? Or are there any questions?
No, there was one question though. And you said peer academics worldwide have been currently discussing the cons of participatory research and how some research has caused problems for peers. Could we speak to that?
Sorry, I think I missed the first half of that. Could you ask that again?
You bet, sorry. So let me scroll back up. Boop, boop, boop. Peer academics worldwide have currently been discussing the cons of participatory research and how some research has caused problems for peers. Could you speak to that?
Sure. I don't think I have too much information on being able to speak to that. I wonder if whoever asked that question could share more information. I would love to explore that a little more. But I don't feel I'm the person to answer that question. I don't know, Christi, if you've heard any about that.
I have not, but would definitely love to
Yeah.
hear some more, and if you can.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. With you. Yes, thank you.
Great.
And then one from Joel. Y'all have done a lot of research on peer support. Could you elaborate on what you see as research areas that you that are already heavily researched being researched versus areas or gaps there's not a lot of research?
Sure. I would.
You want to? Sorry, go ahead.
No, Christy, you go ahead.
Please, you.
Okay, I was going to say, so there is quite a bit of research starting to come out on peer-delivered services, but I think, Christy, you mentioned this at the beginning, that it's still in its earlier stages. So even things that I think we, like people that have been working in the field, like know to be true about outcomes of peer-delivered services may not be reflected in the research literature, which can give it a lot of legs, that as I talked about, kind of that evidence-based backing of it. So I think there's in various settings. So there's things about how research or peers that are in healthcare facilities can be helpful for getting people engaged in services, and also just kind of breaking down the barriers of mistrust within between people who may be actively using and healthcare professionals. So there's quite a bit of research in that area, still a lot more that needs to be done. There's a growing amount of research around the benefit of peers in harm reduction spaces, so making sure that people have access to harm reduction tools and have knowledge about safe using and different practices that can be helpful. I'm trying to think of what, there's a little bit of research on peers in correctional facilities, as we're exploring that a little more with ROAR, but how it can be helpful. That period of transition from incarceration into community can be just extremely stressful for people, and having someone who has lived experience of a use disorder and also formerly incarcerated can really help with that transition as people get connected back to community. So there's been a bit of research on that. But there's lots of gaps, and we're hoping that you all have some ideas on other things that we can study. Christy, anything else you want to add?
No, I think you hit it. There's two more from Penny and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Jasik. So Penny asked, could you speak to where we see the peer work headed? And then Jasik said, in a recent qualitative study, identified system factors interfering with peer supports implementing their values and effectiveness. Can this be investigated quantitatively? So where do we see peer research headed? And then system factors, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit. And Erin just worked on a manuscript that hit some of these areas as well. So Erin, do you want to take that? Yeah,
sure. So I have ideas about where I think it's headed, but I also want to wait for you all to tell me where you think it will be headed. But as this manuscript that we just recently wrote, some ideas that I think would be really fascinating and important to explore would be the ideas of it being just an underutilized workforce, especially in treatment agencies. It's really tough work and it's really important work. So exploring the ideas of burnout within peer services and not necessarily getting the level of support, compensation, thinking about pay models around peer delivered services in order to get that, have it be a more sustainable structure within treatment agencies. And other ways it relates to substance use disorder. So that's where my mind is going when I see it. I'm focused on the idea of sustainability. I think in my mind, the benefits have been proven. There's still a lot of work to do on what that looks like, but I kind of focusing on pushing it forward and making sure it's sustainable.
And one of the things that was called out in this manuscript that just got submitted to one of the journals, and we'll talk about this afternoon when we actually, this afternoon, in a few minutes, after the break, when we get all of your feedback, is that role around, or that issue around role and the role of a peer. So in various settings. And so thinking about, sometimes I think what I have experienced is that peers end up becoming everything, right? So you're a peer, and then you're a research assistant, and then you're a case manager. You know, like the role diffusion gets really murky at times, and I think that needs to be cleared up. And I would love to hear y'all's feedback after the break about what that looks like in various settings. But I just think that like the power differential stuff is important to name, right? And pay inequities and other areas, which I appreciate MHAO doing a recent survey. So all of those things I think that we can explore together is like, where is this field heading and what would be important to you all for us to investigate further. So I'll pause right there because I think we're going to go into a quick.
All right, so we'll take a quick break. I'm going to press play on this, and I think the sound is going to come out of your speakers, but so make sure the sound on your speaker is at a reasonable level, because when I did this morning, I must have really been jamming out on Friday, so it was very loud. All right, so everyone, yeah, feel free to take this time. I think it's about 5 minutes that watch the video or take some time that you need to take a little break before we jump into the discussion. Ooh.
Break upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. I hit feel, right?
Inside
no, upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Don't stop. Can't
stop.
And don't come in.
You don't. You enter frame on don't.
Upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Don't stop. Can't stop until you feel it going down. Upside down and inside out, and you can feel it.
That's tight.
It's good.
Upside down and in pop or upside down?
In.
Can't break upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down. Upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down.
Once you've crossed in, stay on your side. Don't zigzag after that.
Don't zigzag?
No, because that's part of why you're not getting balloons is you're right behind me.
Okay.
Can't break upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down. Upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down.
Am I all painting?
Yeah, you have a little bit of it.
Where? It's not going to come up.
Just rock it. Just rock it.
Can't break upside down and inside out. You can feel it. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down. Upside down and inside out. You can feel it. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down.
Задание закончили.
All right. Okay, hopefully everyone had a nice break and a lot of information. We can jump into the discussion. All right, so as I mentioned, we want to spend the rest of the time on hearing from all of you. So feel free if you want to chat things in, or if you want to unmute yourself, whatever you feel most comfortable with. If you feel comfortable introducing yourself, we just ask that you say your name, your preferred pronouns, and then how you're connected with the peer world, just to give everyone a sense of the work that you do. And so we're really looking at you as experts. We really want to learn from you what you think could be the next steps. And just as a reminder, keeping in mind things that the research and evaluation, usually the goals are for knowledge gain or changing policy and practice. So any thoughts that you have around topic areas or ways that we can more effectively engage people in research, or ways for people that deliver peer services to be involved on the research team. We're looking to hear from you about all of those things, and we'll ask specific questions. So we ask that you treat everyone's ideas with respect. It's not like super controversial of a topic, but I know there's probably differing attitudes about what research should do and what it shouldn't. So just there are no wrong answers. We understand that people might have divergent opinions about things, but we just hope that you can do so in a respectful way. Also, I want to point out that there are these, oh wait, maybe that doesn't exist in the way that things are set up. Sometimes there's like reactions on Zoom. So I was gonna say, if you really like what someone's saying, you could give a thumbs up or a clap, but I don't necessarily see it here. Oh, Adrian just did it. So yeah, if you see that, I think it's called reaction. So you can do that if someone's talking as well, to give us a sense of what you're thinking about what someone's saying. And also just a reminder to share the space. If you feel that you're sharing a lot, give other people a chance. If you think everyone else is talking and you're not getting in there, feel free to put a chat in the box. We really do want to hear from as many people as possible. All right, so let's jump in. So this first question is really, what would be helpful to know for your work? So what topics and groups would you be interested in studying or learning more about to examine the impact of peer-delivered services? And this could be across substance use disorder topics or mental health topics, whatever it is the field that you work in. So examples could be impact on peer-delivered services that it has on the peers delivering the services, those that you serve, the community or setting. Oh, and Christy, I'm sorry, I'll stop sharing so you can share.
I'll share.
Christy will take live notes.
And there is a comment in the chat that I will read. I work at LifeWorks Northwest as a peer coordinator. Probably what would be most helpful in my role is research around different approaches or models in peer support, such as intentional peer support, peer wellness, RAP, planning, peer zone, etc., because I am often asked to show that these trainings are evidence-based in order to justify spending money to send people to these trainings. And the lack of that knowledge base makes it more difficult to advocate for my employees. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And that gets to the idea of, having to prove that something exists, that evidence-based piece. We see that in funding, and we see it in, like was mentioned, sending people to training. So thank you so much for that.
And there's another question, looks like a follow-up then from another person that says, how much does it cost to make something evidence-based?
That's a really good question. So to make something evidence-based, it's difficult to define because depending on the rigor of an activity or a research study, sometimes if there's like a randomized control trial, which means that people are randomly assigned to different groups, and then you study the impact of the intervention that you're implementing. Sometimes it could be just a few of those that you can say that this is proven to be true because we randomly assign people to these groups. But often those are quite expensive, so those aren't and they take years and years and years. So those are actually not typically the research studies that we see a lot happening in this space. They're more the qualitative studies and smaller quantitative studies, maybe linking data sets. And those you need a couple more studies to be able to combine together to show change. So that's a difficult, I can't put a number on it, but I don't know, Christi, if you have thoughts.
No, sometimes those, just so to give you guys a ballpark, sometimes the randomized control trials can be, several $1 million, a couple $1 million over the course of 5 or 6 years. So you think there's a few of those that are needed. I mean, it all depends. The funding is very strange for research. So it can be all over the map, but thinking about how long a study takes and then dissemination of those findings and then people building upon that initial study, it can take a while and take some money to do it. It's a great question though.
Mm-hmm. It looks like 2 more comments about what would be helpful to know or topic suggestions. Peer supervisor trainings, trauma-informed approaches when supervising folks with lived experience. And then the other one that I see is different levels of EBP or evidence-based program approval too. I know, and we're getting more comments here, so I will read them as I see them coming in.
And Adrienne, sorry, can we go back to the person that, and I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the comment section, the person that said different levels of EPP, evidence-based practicing or programming, could you maybe chime in and say a little bit more about what you mean? I want to make sure I grab it.
Yeah, so if, okay, so it looks like JSEC had commented that if you would like to comment or share anything additional, please feel free to unmute or type in the chat and I can read from there. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat. And just so folks know, to unmute, if you see in your little video or in your little black box that has your name in it, if you click on the upper right-hand corner, there is a blue button that says unmute. If you click that, then you can unmute yourself if you have a comment that you would like to share. So just
Hi, Adrienne, this is Penny Peters, and I just kind of wanted to echo a little bit about Tim's comment here. I'm currently working in a system where we're doing all kinds of system change that has been initiated by the Oregon Health Authority, but has pretty broad boundaries about how the program should be developed. So I am finding that professional development is a challenge. Also, all the way up to our CEO is interested in our opinions on the ground as traditional health workers, but they don't really know what questions to ask, so I get to feed that as well. And then the providers and individuals who sort of seem to wrap themselves in academic armor, I also get to chink through that, as there are so many boundaries. Like every day it's just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, which is, yay, we get to create the maze, and but it seems like there's a lot of like dead end trails, and so then you have to retrack and go back and find a clear path. And so for me personally, it feels like a lot of punching up all day long. And so, yeah, it's very interesting to be, maybe not have the professional development respect, or maybe even not have the recognition as a professional, but yet all the professionals are sort of looking to us for the answers. So it's very like, it's an interesting waters to navigate.
That is a really helpful context. Thank you, Penny.
And I see a response here in the chat from JSEC clarifying about that earlier comment. It reads, I was just pointing out that not all EBP needs to meet control trial levels. And then we have a whole bunch of new chat comments here as well. So I'm gonna scroll back to make sure that we have all of those. Wow, it's really great, the level of comments that are happening here. So I'll read this next comment from Tim. He, him, his pronouns. I would be most interested in learning more about how peer workers are treated in the workplace beyond just supervision. There's a lot of talk about how peer workers need to engage in individualized self-care and keep an eye on their own wellness, but when they're working within systems that cause harm and are not paid equitably, receiving benefits, treated with respect by other staff, then a different approach needs to be taken that recognizes how the workplace is impacting peer workers beyond what they can address on an individual level. Without solid data to back this up, it has been hard getting traction around this conversation in Wisconsin.
That's such a great point, Tim. The idea of studying the workplace and how it could be a place that is not supportive of peers and their work that they're doing. That's such a great idea.
Great. And then I will read a question from Paul. Many times we receive pushback from different providers, mental health or social workers. How do different people work around these barriers? And then another comment that we've received here in the chat is, my name is Dawn, pronoun is she, hers. I am a recovery mentor at Bridges to Change. I struggle with getting the trainings needed to support my peers better, such as mental health first aid, peer wellness training.
Mm-hmm. Training seems really important. The professional development seems to keep coming up. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Next chat comment. Hello, I'm Sage, they, them, and I work for the Living Room, which is a nonprofit that works with LGBTQ+ youth. I am learning how we can integrate peer support within our programming. And this group of youth is so intersectional, so some things that would be helpful are more youth-oriented research that brings together brain development, mental health, gender identity, sexuality, drug use, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the impact of virtual/distance learning and living in our current state of the world.
Great suggestions. I recently looked into youth-oriented peer work, and I in the research world, and I really couldn't find very much. So I think there's a lot to explore there to prop up some evidence to support the work that you're doing. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm. And I see a comment, P.S. we're still seeing Christi's screen. And yes, I believe the intent is for everyone to be able to see the notes that are being taken live so that we can just see how those are being reflected.
And make sure I'm capturing it correctly, y'all. So if there's something that I've typed that's not what you meant, please tell me. I want to make sure what you're thinking here is captured right.
Yes. And then, all right, a comment from Anne, peers on emergency teams. For example, the Portland Street Response suddenly wrote peers out of their model. The original proposal was to have an EMT and a peer support person. Look at the pros and cons of having a clinician versus a peer. How can researchers get feedback from participants to share their thoughts of being faced with a peer or a clinician on the street? Which do peers on the street prefer? How to get funding for what we prefer?
That's
Adrian,
great thinking.
Adrian, can you say about midway down after the pros and cons? Could you say that one more time?
Yes. Sorry, as soon as I change what I'm looking at, the chat has so many fantastic comments in it that I kind of scroll back to try to find that. Okay, so here we are. Pros and cons of having a clinician versus a peer. How can researchers get feedback from participants to share their thoughts of being faced with a peer or a clinician on the street? And which do peers on the street prefer?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, how do we get funding for what we prefer then?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I see some comments here. It seems like follow-up comments from just folks within this workshop commenting to one another and sharing some information. There's a comment about agreeing on the youth focus. I had a manager ask for research about peer support with youth, and I only found one study. And Anne comments that the comment from peers on emergency teams is from Anne, she, her, hers. I work as a warm line operator and have done research with immigrants and refugees. Looking forward to more research, including refugees, asylees, and immigrants. And just validation, thank you for showing the notes. Great idea. Thank you for doing that. You know, some more comments about transparency, digging it. And Joel Zezer, I would like to see research evaluating treatment outcomes from peer support specialists working with clients versus outcomes of other professionals such as psychologists, social worker, LPC. So peer support's ability to meet clients in meeting recovery goals, improving quality of life, decreases in frequency, duration, severity of suicide and depression versus other professions. And I'll pause there for a second. I know there's a lot of great information here.
Yes.
Then analyze for value of peers in treatment, cost effectiveness, lives saved, to advocate for inclusion. Also, test treatment outcomes with inclusion of peers in various combinations, client receiving peer support / therapy, peer support / medication, peer only, and attitudes of multidisciplinary teams of peer support specialists. And then in parentheses, qualifications, value, respect of opinion, respect, ability to meet treatment goals. Oh my goodness, and I see I have a notification. There are 19 new messages. So we're just having a really vibrant discussion here. I love that there's so many thoughts.
Yeah.
The other thing I would jump in really quick is, and to just say is, I want to make sure everybody hears this, is that when you guys are putting them in chat, because it's being recorded, we actually have a live like output of all of this. So we'll go back and make sure that we have everything. If I'm not capturing it here, or Adrian's not able to with time limits or constraints, then we will have it. So
Yes.
rest assured, we've got it.
Yes. All right. So another comment from Malcolm. I would like to see research into the phenomena of people with lived experience who work as peer workers being co-opted by the system, where they come to believe that their role is as quasi-clinician or pseudo-clinician, rather than power share system disruptor. For example, this manifests in language and relational engagement style that undermines the unique benefit of having peer workers.
Say that last part one more time, Adrienne. I want to make sure I got it.
Yeah. So the last part was how this can manifest in language and relational engagement style that undermines the unique benefits of having peer workers. Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate so much that we thought this was going to be first presentation Monday morning. We were going to have a quiet crowd. So we actually have 9 questions to go through in 7 minutes. So please keep typing into the chat, but I wonder if we can throw up the other questions too,
Yes.
just to get people thinking as well. So maybe we can skip the second one, which is about setting, because I think people are already kind of thinking in the way of setting, but jumping down to what should be considered when conducting research. And what suggestions do you have for how to involve peers in research? These are all great, thank you. Okay. Adrienne, I'm not sure where you left off, or if you might be getting more than I'm.
Sure. So just a clarifying question. Do you want me to just read the new comments that are coming in specific to this new question? Okay.
I think you can, yeah. Whatever seems best.
All right. So it looks like we have a new comment for the most recent question. My name is Chelsea, pronoun she, her, hers. I work for a Center for Independent Living in Wisconsin and work as a coordinator for peer-run recovery centers. I am interested in learning more about serving people who are marginalized due to several pieces of their identities. I'm especially interested in learning how peers in mental health and substance use recovery will provide quality services for people who have disabilities, including intellectual disabilities, those who are deaf or hard of hearing, who live with autism, etc. Also, how we will continue to move forward and get more peers involved in the research and leading new initiatives from these and other marginalized communities, and have more representation from entry level and or direct service and up. And I realize as I said that, that may have been a comment for the previous question, but I do see a new comment from Penny that says data for dollars to move peer work forward. Yes. Thank you for holding space for research and supporting and creating narrative regarding integrated healthcare and peer voice equity.
Thank you. Wonderful, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other comments about how we can be sure to include peers in work, in research? Feel free also to unmute if you want to share verbally. Or keep sending in topics, those are great too.
This is Penny. Oh, sorry.
Penny. No, please, Penny, go ahead.
This is Penny. I don't have a pronoun preference. I do identify as asexual. And I am just curious how one would get involved in the research. Like, how could I, support in that?
Yeah, Christi, do you want to handle that?
I think there's many different ways. What I would say is look to research that's happening in your community. and reach out to individuals that may be conducting research and ask them, do they have like a peer research advisory group? I say that because it's one of the things we had a misstep in, Penny, that we started conducting peer research. And then as we were developing what the research would look like, we didn't have any peers at the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is a lesson learned for us. And so I think for those of you that are peers at the table, look to your community, what's happening, reach out to folks and say, do you have, peers represented to help shape and mold the questions, how we're engaging peers, what that looks like, how we're paying for peers, what's an equitable reimbursement for peers to be involved in research. These are things that sometimes, even with our own lived experience, we just have missteps and we make mistakes. So I think that's a first step. Erin, anybody else have ideas?
And also, if you're interested in any of our research, please reach out to us. We're excited to continue these conversations. We have a lot of work that we're working towards. So having connections and this networking, why we love Peerpocalypse, just meeting so many great people doing awesome work. So please, we'll share our email addresses at the end. So please reach out. We're happy to talk and keep moving this forward.
Yeah, there's another question from Malcolm that says, who is doing this work, research for people labeled SMI?
That's a great question, Malcolm. In particular, because that with mental illness, that has not been our area primarily, but I know nationally, in looking at websites such as PubMed and some other areas, you can look to see who is doing that level of work. Erin, I look to you. You might have had more experience than I have in that topic area in the past.
Yeah, Susan Chapman's doing a lot of work out of UCSF, I think she is.
Okay.
Yeah, she's done a lot. And gosh, I'm blanking on the other person's name.
And if any of our other team members on board want to jump in as well and know specifically about research with mental illness.
Christi, I'm seeing we just have a minute left, so maybe we can share our nice photo and then our.
Yes, I'll stop share.
Let's see. And then we can share our email addresses. We were going to share this as a break, but thank you all for contributing so much. These are our little puppies. All right, now let me go to, and here are our email addresses. So as I mentioned, please feel free to reach out. Would love to continue this conversation. I'm so sorry it got cut short because all the information you already shared was so wonderful so far.
Oh, and in the chat, Anne wrote that Patricia Gotzi is sharing her mental health research tomorrow, Tuesday at 12, I believe. So if you guys will take a look at your schedule, there's some ongoing discussion. And thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. Please reach out to us if you have more questions, ideas. And thanks for letting us be here with you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Christi and Erin. What an informative presentation. Thank you so much to everyone who participated in the incredible discussion that was happening in the chat. So the good news is we will be able to get a log of the chat so that we can look over all of those comments and questions. I realize due to time, because this is a 90-minute presentation, we weren't able to cover every fantastic comment that came through, but the good news is we can go back and look at that. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Peerpocalypse. I'm seeing a lot of great comments. Thank you so much. Great info and inspiration. So thank you again to Erin and Christi, and I will move to close this workshop. Thank you all.